Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we're going to begin a new Learn to Play series taking a look at the British light cruiser line. Let's take a spin around Tier 6's HMS Leander. Now, you might argue that the line kind of properly starts down at Tier 5. If you've seen some of these videos before, you know that I tend not to review ships before Tier 5. Because, you just don't spend enough time in them to really grasp what's happening most of the time. And frankly, it's not worth it. There's an argument to be made for maybe bucking that trend a bit here on the British Lights. Because one of the very first things you're going to discover when you start playing these ships is, wait a minute, where is my high explosive ammo? How am I supposed to be competitive without high explosive ammo? And it's a fair concern, right? Because in the lower tiers, you're kind of, as a cruiser player, you play the Japanese, you play the Americans, you play almost anybody, you're kind of ingrained, hey, just fire HE and it's kind of your all-purpose general good stuff ammo. But the British light cruisers never once, ever have access to high explosive. So from the beginning, all the way down at Tier 2, you're firing AP going, well, I hope this works. And what you probably discovered along the way, presuming you're grinding the line, is, hey, this AP works pretty well. But you probably don't understand why it works. This is one of those things that wargaming fails at. They fail at explaining what it is about the British light cruisers that makes them function the way that they do. And I'm going to explain this to you because it's critically important that you understand why these ships perform the way they do, what they do well, what they really don't do well, and there are some pretty glaring weaknesses, okay? And how you can utilize them to have amazingly hilarious, fun, really good games, and then sometimes it all just falls apart on you when you're riding on the ocean floor, right? It's not all sunshine and roses out here, kids. But these are really good ships. So let's start with a small history lesson. The British light cruisers were arguably, when they released, one of the most controversial lines of boats ever introduced into World of Warships, because they went through a very, very, very long testing cycle. Wargaming's developers at the time, this was probably, I'm thinking, maybe about 2018, maybe 2017. Somebody who actually, one of the super testers in chat can correct me, in the comments can correct me or something. I don't remember, but it was a while ago. It was like 6-7 years, right? But they really struggled to get the balance on these ships correct. They tried them a lot of different ways, with smoke, without smoke, with heals, with HE, without. And finally, when the line released, they had smoke, no high explosive, AP only. And everybody thought they were on crack. They were like, are you kidding? You're giving me light cruiser shells with no high explosive? How the hell am I supposed to fight anything bigger than me? A lot of people dismissed these ships almost out of hand right as they released. But those of us, like me, who are stubborn contrarians, who were like, well, I'm going to give this a shot because I want to give it a go, discovered very quickly that the AP performance on these ships is unlike anything else the game had seen before. Now, Wargaming has gone back to this well several times since, and we'll talk about that, hopefully, in some other Learn to Play videos. But for the moment, it's important that you understand the AP shell characteristics of British light cruisers are probably, to this point in your game experience, almost totally unique. So let me talk about why that is. All right, I'm going to put two graphics up on the screen here, and I want you to understand what you're looking at. On the left are the shell characteristics inside the game code for an armor-piercing shell fired by the ship in front of you, Tier 6 British light cruiser HMS Leander. The shell on the right, the box on the right, is a shell fired by Tier 6 American light cruiser USS Dallas. Okay, these are both 152 millimeter, 6-inch light cruiser armor-piercing rounds. So as you start from the bottom and just kind of look through the various characteristics of the shell, compare them side by side, you're going to notice some things. Obviously, they're both 152s, they're both APs. The alpha damage is fairly comparable. They do not have The damage and explosion size are both characteristics that are related to HE shells. Those will be zeroed out on this particular shell. Same as the burn probability. You see there it's marked as minus 50%, basically effectively 0. At no point will an AP shell ever light a fire. Projectile speed. This is the barrel velocity. This is something you can see in your port like anybody else. 841 for the Brits, 762 for the Americans. Now we're going to start getting into some of the important stuff. Ricochet chance. You see there on the left, Leander's shells don't start making ricochet checks until 60 degrees, whereas the Americans start making them at 45 degrees. If you remember the American heavy cruiser videos, I put that little graphic that talked about bounce angles. I'm going to replicate it here, okay? So what's happening here is that on the half of the graph without the British flag, I have a incoming shell, right? That would be it's fired by Dallas. Almost any other armor-piercing light cruiser shell in the game will not start bouncing until the plated hits on the opposing ship is 45 degrees. In between 0, perfectly perpendicular, and 45 degrees, the shell will fuse we'll get to that in a minute. It will fully penetrate, and you will get at least a partial full penetration damage out of that shell. Between 45 and 60 degrees, the shell will make a random check. It has an opportunity, a chance to bounce. You don't know if it will. There's basically a die roll that the game runs to say, okay, this shell made it. Oh, this shell didn't. Okay. Past 60 degrees, auto bounce, right? Anything after that will automatically ricochet. On the half of the graph with the British flag, you're seeing how Leander's shells perform. They do not begin to make that check until 60 degrees. They will stop making that check at 75 degrees, and at 75 to 90 degrees, they will automatically ricochet. So the British light cruisers are confined to AP, but they get something very, very similar to American heavy cruiser armor-piercing performance when it comes to ricochet angles. This is important. Keep going down the line. Don't worry about air drag. Don't worry about mass. Don't worry about corrupt. Projectile detonator and detonator threshold. These are very important to the conversation we're about to have. The projectile detonator on the left, you see there, of course, for Leander, 0.005 seconds. 5/1000ths of a second. On the right, Dallas, twice as long. 10/1000ths of a second. Below that, detonator threshold, 12 on the left. That's 12 millimeters of armor. Dallas on the right, 25 millimeters of armor. What does this mean? It means that Leander's shells will, once they penetrate a minimum of 12 millimeters of armor, that fuse timer will kick off. And in 5/1000ths of a second, the shell will explode. The shell will detonate. Naval armor-piercing rounds do still have explosives contained within the shell. This is a different thing, I'm told, from how tank shells work. Very commonly, apparently, tank shells don't do this. But like armor-piercing rounds in naval combat still have high explosives in them, okay? So Leander's shells, once they penetrate 12 millimeters of armor, that fuse timer will kick off and the shell will explode. On the right, those values for Dallas are literally doubled. Functionally, for you as a player, what does this mean? The key takeaway here is when Leander fires her armor-piercing shells at lightly armored targets, I'm talking about destroyers and submarines, basically, okay? Those shells will fully penetrate and explode. You will get full pens out of AP shells off of Leander. Dallas, most other light cruisers in World of Warships, will not. Those shells will over-penetrate by default because there are a handful of destroyers in this game that have more than 25 millimeters of armor, and they're all in the high tiers, basically, right? So Dallas would never see another destroyer that would have 25 millimeters of armor. There's just nothing in her matchmaking bracket that this shell would not overpen. If you're a Dallas and you're firing armor-piercing rounds at a destroyer, hopefully you're just clearing your barrels so you could swap to HE because you want to be firing HE. But Leander doesn't get HE, she only gets AP, so her advantage is that when she's firing at lightly armored targets, her shells will almost always represent full penetration damage, presuming she can get them on target and get them to land in the right place. Now, That makes her highly effective, the whole line really highly effective at murdering destroyers and possibly at murdering other cruisers. But it means that they really struggle against other targets, right? A battleship, for example, 12 millimeters of armor when a half second, 1,000 second of fuse means that if you fire this at anything other than like a battleship's maybe casemate armor and superstructure, you're going to get bupkis. You're going to get absolutely nothing. It'll be a 0 damage hit, basically. So you have to be very cognizant of what you're firing at, where you're firing, and those bounce angles. Anybody who goes bow into you, anybody, even a destroyer that goes bow into you, is almost fully immune to your guns. That's an exaggeration because you can still get penetration damage through their superstructure. But the bottom line is your damage will fall off very quickly. And you will be figuring out, okay, crap, now what, right? Like, I don't know how to threaten this guy, right? So there's some definite quirks to this line. But Leander is an amazing ship nonetheless, okay? And we're going to talk about that. We're going to run around. We're going to compare to contemporaries. But what we just talked about with the shell performance and everything is critical to understanding this line, why the line performs the way it does, why the line excels at the things it does. And we're going to refer back to this portion of this video many times through the course of these, all right? So let's talk about Leander. For starters, I'm in the wrong column. Here we go. For starters, survivability. 31,400 hit points. I do not believe I have Survivability Expert. Oh, I do have Survivability Expert. Well, let's send you to Reserve then, sir, and have a look at the real number, which is 28,700 hit points. Pretty much middle of the pack. Pretty much middle of the pack, right? The high end here at Tier 6 is going to be something along the lines of probably... Well, it looks like for light cruise, it's going to be Kekdun around 32,000. But you've got some other lights that are over 30. I'm looking at you, Amarante Cochrane. I'm looking at you, De Grasse. I'm looking at you, Budioni. There are a number of light cruisers in this tier that have less health than this. But it's a pretty short list. Ramat, for example, Huangme, those kinds of ships. So you're on the low end. It's something you have to be cognizant of. You are a light cruiser. You are never going to win any health pool contest in World of Warships. Also, no torpedo protection. 0. Flat out nothing. So don't take torpedoes. We said it all throughout the American cruiser line videos. We're going to say it all throughout here. And just drill it into your brain. If you're a cruiser in World of Warships, a regular old Joe Blow lighter heavy cruiser, you really, really, really don't want to take torpedoes. There are some super cruisers in the game that can maybe deal with it better. But in general, you don't want to take torpedoes. Armor. Okay, well, as you would expect, as a light cruiser, this is not something that Leander does exceptionally well. My extremities, 13 millimeters basically throughout, 13 millimeters of deck armor, 10 mils throughout most of the elevated superstructure. I've got a little bit of 16 millimeter armor here through the center of the deck and this part of the superstructure. My belt armor, only 100 mils. When I start peeling away the layers, you can see that the Citadel is quite large and sits very, very near the water line. Now, this is not the worst Citadel you're going to find in the line. So that's, you've got that going for you, right? It does sit fairly low, basically from the stacks to the aft superstructure, and you only got the 100 millimeters. So anything is going to mess with you. Light cruisers can penetrate this pretty effectively, okay? So anytime you turn broadside against somebody who's going to load their AP, you are going to be sorry. You're going to regret it. It's just the way it is. It's one of the quirks of this entire line. But as far as things go, this is actually not as bad as it gets. So learn to protect your Citadel, learn to position your ship, use this armor, use angling, try to maximize your the armor angle and everything so that you can stay alive. Because there are some ships further up the line that are way worse than this, that are massive struggle buses when it comes to the Citadel. Leander's going to look great by comparison, so just trust me on this. Essentially, anything that shoots you is going to hurt you. You're going to take full pins. You'll take full pins from destroyer HE throughout most of the ship. So you're going to take a lot of damage anytime you end up in a gunfight. The good news is you can alleviate some of that. We'll talk about more of that in a little bit. Concealment and maneuverability. Well, let's recall the commander, and then you can see the full concealment of the ship. Full concealment rig, full stealth rig here on a Leander is 9 flat. That is really, really solid, guys. That's really solid. That puts you ahead of pretty much every other cruiser, almost every other cruiser in the tier. Now, there's a handful of exceptions, but they're like 3. So you are among the stealthiest cruisers in this tier. Of course, all the destroyers you're up against will outspot you, and that's just the way it is. But you have an excellent, excellent stealth number here, and believe me, you're going to need it. So you got to learn to live this, love this number, and use it to maximize it to your advantage. 34 knots, I think that's with a speed flag. Yeah, that's with the speed flag. Okay, so much like the British destroyers, the British cruisers are not known for their speed. She's a 32.5 base, 710 on the turning circle, 7.8 on the rudder shift. She handles pretty well. Okay. Now, one of the other things that we'll talk about here while we're talking about maneuverability, and this is easier, I can explain it, but it's much easier to see it and experience it, and we'll talk about it later in the video, in the sample game, is the British light cruisers get special acceleration. From 0 to basically about half speed, they accelerate faster than almost every other ship in World of Warships. So when you're basically stopped, they're at low speed, and you turn, you call for full speed, this ship will jump. It will build up a head of steam very quickly, and then slowly work its way up to its top speed. It's kind of one of the, I won't say advantages, counterbalancing, let's say, the fact that their top speed is kind of crap. They get up to that top speed a little quicker than almost all of their contemporaries. So they got that going for them. Main battery. Leander's main battery is comprised of 4 pairs of 152 millimeter guns. I've got a super firing pair forward and a super firing pair back aft. These have been nerfed all the way down to a 9-second reload. This feels kind of crappy, right? Leander's reload used to be way better than this. Way better than this. 7.5 seconds at one point. But apparently the ship just continues to overperform and overperform. I'm at a point now where I feel like the 9 seconds is a little excessive. I feel like she'd be fine around, 8.2, 8.5, something like this. But this is where Wargaming has it right now, and it is what it is. We talked about why the shells are good, so I won't go into that. But you see there, 3,100 damage out of the AP. AP's all you get. You're firing AP all day, every day. You never have to worry about shell choices, ammunition choices in a British light cruiser. The guns are fairly accurate, and despite the what I consider to be the nerfed reload time, you will still find these guns performing very, very well against, as we noted earlier, destroyers, most cruisers, and battleships. It's very common to see battleships who disrespect your guns. You are just a light cruiser after all, and you can't light them on fire, which is a thing that most battleship players seem terrified of half the time. And so what you end up doing is you aim a little higher. You aim for right at their deck line. And you'll see me do this in the video later. You aim basically right at their deck line, and you're trying to get full pens out of these guns right through the superstructure and possibly their casemate armor. And you'll be shocked at how much damage you can rack up against battleships who ignore you while you do that. Now, that's full penetration damage. A good chunk of that they're going to be able to heal back because they're all battleships and they all have heals. But the fact that you're causing them to burn those heals on your full pen damage rather than fires, it absolutely all plays into how the mechanics of whether or not that ship survives over the long run later. Plus, it's damage for you, and, that's how we get XP and credits in this game, and that's the goal. So, yeah. The firing angles on these guns are actually pretty good. I'll put the graphic up here for a moment. Let's have a peek. You can get all 4 guns off the bow, about 35 degrees off the bow, which is pretty good. And it's about this very comparable for the aft. Looks like back to 32 degrees off the aft. So yeah, it's pretty solid. You've got really good gun angles. That's at least one thing you're not going to be fighting against in these ships. You don't have to. You can get all your guns on target without probably giving them that 45-degree check angle that they're looking for in order to get citadels or full pens through your armor. Most ships, if they're firing AP at you, and you will get a whole lot of AP fired at you, will bounce those as long as you're angling the ship correctly. Torpedoes. All British light cruisers have torpedoes. In this case, Leander's got a quad on each side of the ship. You see them there, 100-second reload, 8-kilometer range. They hit decently hard. These are actually pretty good little torpedoes. This is something that you'll use these a lot, okay? But the trick is that they get better as you go up the line, because eventually you reach a point where your torpedo range and your concealment number are much closer together. Here, right, I have an 8-kilometer torpedo range on a 9-kilometer concealment. So if somebody's pushing into me and I'm running away, let's say there's a battleship and I'm running away from him, much like a Japanese heavy cruiser or an American destroyer who has very short torpedo range, I can fire those torpedoes back over my shoulder, and the opposing ship will close the distance to the point where they have wandered into the range of that torpedo, and I might land some hits. You can also find yourself potentially trying to do, last-minute crazy torpedo charges with these boats sometimes. It can happen, but you got to remember that your armor is crap, and if you push somebody who has bigger guns than you in the hopes of getting a torpedo strike off to save your game, I would not bank the whole game on that, right? That's probably going to end in disappointment. One thing that these ships can do, and we'll talk about it again in the British destroyers, they can single fire these torpedoes as well. So right now, if you've played some other destroyers, you're used to being able to, you fire the whole launcher at once. Leander doesn't necessarily have to do that. She can fire a single torpedo at a time out of either launcher and just see what happens. That can lead to some really, really fun interactions. It can lead to some fun dev strikes, and it also gives you the possibility, the opportunity to potentially conga line all 4 of your torpedoes into a target who is bow on to you, who's very narrow profile, and good things can happen when that takes place. Depth charges. Unfortunately, Leander does not get aerial depth charges. A lot of light cruisers in World of Warships are stuck with roll-off depth charges, and Leander is no exception. I'm looking on the deck here to even see where these damn things are, and here we go. Looks like this is it right here. Right here on the very stern, I've got this little launcher. I dropped 2 bombs out of this guy, and that is it. Now, these bombs hit hard. 5,000 because they're British, and the Brits have really, really, really good depth charges. The trick is I'm only putting out 2 bombs every time I push the button. Ordinarily, I would only get 2 charges of this. I am taking the module, we'll talk about this in a minute, that ups that just in case I find myself having to use it. AA defense is something you are not very good at. You have, I'd say, average to slightly below average AA. You're putting up 3 flak puffs. That's with the captain's skill over here. That would give you an extra. So 2 base on probably around 1,000 or so damage. And then your continuous damage is, again, it's okay. You will kill some tier 6 planes, right? Are you a no-fly zone? Are you going to seriously contribute to the A defense of your team? Not really. You don't get any kind of defensive fire consumables. Your base AA is what it is. This will change at the top end of the line. But here in the middle tiers, this is something that you don't do well. Planes are sort of your enemy. We talked about your stealth earlier, right? When you're a stealthy ship, you don't want to be spotted at times, and sometimes planes can ruin that for you. Now, the good news is that, like some of the destroyers out there, and certainly most of the cruisers, your aerial concealment matches your AA range. So if planes are spotting you, you can at least be shooting them down. That's good, but you really don't want to be spotted sometimes. So that's something you're going to have to learn to play around when there's a carrier in the game. Let's talk about consumables, because this is one of the most critical things to talk about in this entire line. How do you get a line of ships that has only armor piercing that requires specific firing angles to perform in World of Warships? And the answer is you give them smoke. You give them smoke. Up until the British light cruisers, smoke cruisers were kind of an oddball thing in World of Warships. There weren't many. Mikhail Kutuzov had been released, and she was kind of the bane of a lot of battleship players. In fact, the smoke in these ships is, I think, if I recall, one of the reasons that they really struggled to make HE work on them anyway, right? Because if you have smoke and you have an HE spammer, basically it was like having an entire line of Mikhail Kutuzovs in the game, and the battleship players of the era were very, very unhappy with this during testing. So they eventually took away the HE, but they kept the smoke. And this gives these ships a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity to sit in smoke and impact cap circles, impact important things. I say cap circles, but also could be like arms race buff areas, those kinds of things. And so the smoke is really, really, really critical. Now, one thing we didn't talk about back in maneuverability, right? We talked about how the ship accelerates very, very quickly, accelerates very, very well. That's amazing. Here's the problem. None of these ships, and Leander's on this list, of course, stops for crap. When you pull the handbrake and start smoking, and you literally throw the thing, full reverse, you call for full astern and start smoking, you will take a lot longer than you want, a lot longer than you expect to slow down. So I would encourage you, as you start to play these ships, make the time to slow down to maybe half speed at least before you smoke and open fire and get spotted before your smoke envelops you. If you do it at full speed and cut the brakes, it's very likely you'll actually end up drifting completely out of your smoke cloud. It'll be behind you going, hey, where'd you go? And you're sailing around and naked, and it won't feel good because someone will load the AP and shoot at you, and you'll probably end up dead. So you're going to have to learn how the speed works. So play around with that throttle. If you're brand new to these ships, maybe take one to a training room. Try it out a little bit, right? Get used to it. But the ships slow down very, very, very painfully. Now, technically you have the choice between smoke, fighter, and spotter. Under no circumstances do you want fighter. Please do not ever take this consumable. This is terrible. Spotter, you could, but why? Why would you do this? Don't do this. You want to take smoke. You really want to take smoke, especially here at Leander, especially at Fiji, and we'll talk about that in the next video. So smoke should be your default choice. You also have access to a standard repair party, which feels really good. The British Lights were one of the first mid-tier cruisers in the game to get access to repair built into the hull starting here at Tier 6. This is another reason I started this explanation at Tier 6 rather than lower down, although you do have the heal, I think, going all the way down to like Tier 4 or Tier 5. But either way, the repair party is handy, but this is not a crazy repair party. It's a standard one. It'll heal like 5,000-6,000 HP. So if you take big Citadels and you get just nuked, this is not really a huge benefit. These repair parties are meant for you to be tangling with lighter units and destroyers. You get into gunfights with those guys. They ding you up a little bit. You can heal back a chunk of that and then get back to work. So if you get into a fight with a battleship, this is not going to save you. You do get standard hydro. This is standard Tier 6 hydro, 4-kilometer radius. Out to, let's see what I've got this one cranked up to about 132 seconds of active time, which is really nice. If you're going to sit in smoke, you really want hydro, don't you? Yes, you do. So you've got that nice pair. This will shield you from incoming, prying eyes and allow you to fight. And the hydro, of course, smoke clouds are torpedo magnets. The hydro will allow you to see some of that coming and hopefully not take crazy amounts of damage from torpedoes. And of course, you get your standard damage control party. When it comes to upgrades, you really want to stick with main armaments modification 1. Again, unless you play spotter Leander, dear God, I don't know why you would do that. I wouldn't consider this. The rest of these are just mediocre in my mind compared to main armaments mod. I'm running hydroacoustic search mod here in slot 2 because I'm trying to maximize the duration of my hydro. If you don't have that or you don't want to spend the coal on it, engine room protection is just fine. I would not recommend damage control system in this slot. I'm running aiming systems in slot 3. This is questionable, right? I mean, I am a light cruiser. I'm putting shells down range every 9 seconds. Am I really concerned about where they go? The answer is you kind of are. And the reason for this is that most of the time, a lot of experienced players understand your threat. You are a threat to opposing ships when they are showing you a broadside or an angle up to about 60 degrees. The maximum number of salvos that you can get, maximum number of shells you can get on target in the window between when you catch them and when they can turn stern on or bow on to you matters. But that's going to drive how much damage you can get and how impactful you're going to be in that engagement. Aiming systems mod gives you just a little extra leg up in making sure you get more shells on target. What are your other options in here? Main battery mod. This is not bad. I mean, the turret traverse is not amazing. But 22 seconds is acceptable, so I tend to avoid it. But again, if you struggle with it, there's nothing wrong with this mod. Do not take secondary mod. The secondaries on this ship are not worth writing home for. We kind of talked about how the AA is really not worth it. And then, of course, torpedo tubes. I mean, you're not really a torpedo cruiser. I don't think there's a lot of value here. Smoke generator isn't going to do you a lot. It will do you a little, but it won't do you a lot. If this was the crawling smoke like we have over on Perth or Hobart, for example, this is useful, but probably not here. So I think the good choices are either aiming system or main battery mod. In upgrade slot 4, you have 3 possible choices. You can see here I'm running depth charges modification 1. I really don't ever want to have to need this. If I, as a light cruiser, am driving over a submarine to depth charge him, stuff has gone super wrong in this game, and I'm yelling at my teammates. But if you find yourself in that situation, having the extra charges, I think, can make a big difference. Steering gears is available to you. This would probably be my other default pick if you don't want to invest in depth charges. And then damage control system, this is not really going to be super useful to you. I would not bother with it. As far as signal flags go for Leander, I would strongly encourage you to take the 3 right here on the bottom row. These are the kind of the core of a flag build for this ship. Sierra Mike, she's not fast. She wants the speed. November Foxtrot. This ship Most of the ships in this line live and die by how you utilize these consumables. Having them available, that little 5% extra buff on the cooldown, every little bit helps. And then, of course, India Delta making your heal a little better. Every little bit that can keep you in the game, that can help you get damage downrange, all of that is useful. You could consider Sierra Bravo if you want a little more hydrophone action time. Again, November Echo Seta 7, if you've got these laying around, you want a little more AA. And, of course, I would always recommend Juliet Charlie if you don't want to explode. Captain skills, I typically default to my original kind of focus base for this ship would be Grease the Gears, probably Focus Fire Training, Superintendent, and Concealment Expert. After that, I would probably double back and grab Adrenaline Rush, and then Survivability Expert. Survivability Expert on a ship like this is a twofold skill. Not only does it make your base health a little higher, which is never a bad thing necessarily. It also means that your heals are a little more effective because your total health pool is larger. Each individual heal heals just a little more. So over the course of a game, while Survivability Expert on your total health pool doesn't feel amazing, because you have the heal, you're getting more use out of it than you otherwise would. After that, I would also consider doubling back and grabbing Consumable Specialist for the same reason we just talked about mounting November Foxtrot. Ship's going to live and die by how well you manage these consumables, and having them available makes all the difference. Now, I've only got a 17-point captain on this ship. If I was to look at some other skills that might be worth investing in, you could consider something like Top Grade Gunner. This would not be a bad choice. You want to avoid all of the torpedo skills. This is not a torpedo cruiser. You definitely want to avoid Demolition Expert. You don't have any HE. You could consider Priority Target or Incoming Fire Alert. You are very fragile. These help keep you alive and help warn you that someone is shooting at you or someone is looking at you. So that is useful. And also, Last Stand, also potentially useful for a single point. Ships that with this little armor tend to take engine in caps when they get hit amidships, even with a big AP shell or an HE shell. So this can sometimes save your bacon, save you a damage control party. All right, so having taken a tour around Leander and to kind of explain some of the shell mechanics, let's go have a look at some sample gameplay, and I'll see you guys back here in a minute. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our sample game in Tier 6 British cruiser, light cruiser, let's say. This is HMS Leander. Spawning here on the top end of Strait, we get fairly favorable matchmaking, purely a Tier 5-6 game. This will happen to you probably, I'm going to say, roughly about half the time you're playing through a middle-tier ship. So take advantage of it when you can get it, because it's very, very handy. Now, one of the things about Strait is that action is going to start on this map very, very quickly. You can see I'm only, 9-ish kilometers from the center of the A-cap when I spawn, maybe 10 kilometers back when I start in, and I'm only moving at half speed. I don't want to push up quickly. I don't want to be the first thing spotted. Like we talked about earlier, your armor scheme will not support it. You're very likely to get dev struck if you show up at the wrong time in the wrong position. So you have to be much more cautious about how you approach caps, approach control zones early, especially before you have an idea of where the opposing destroyers are. I'm going to end up turning a little to starboard here, get my guns flipped to port side. We see the opposing Emerald. He's spotted by the submarine off to my left over on the A line. And he's going to draw some early fire before he kind of smokes up here in a minute next to the cap. I want to be able to get all of my guns on target for this guy before we lose sight of him. You see now he's turning in, he's smoking. He's already slowing down a bit. This is a guy who understands Emerald. I'm going to get all my guns on target, pull the trigger right about there as he should continue to drift just a little bit. Remember, these British ships don't slow down that quickly, and sure enough, we get at least one Citadel and some good full pins for about a 7K hit right off the go. I'm going to burn a smoke, but I burned it at low speed, so I'm not going to get a huge size of this smoke. I'm going to speed up, but then the smoke expires right as I might potentially have dropped another puff, and so I'm going to drift right out of this smoke cloud. Well, that's bloody irritating. However, if you look at the mini-map, the Mackenzie would be outside my firing bloom, and all the other ships are either behind smoke or in smoke or behind island cover. I can actually sit out here and shoot for free for a little bit. I'm going to fish in smoke for this Emerald. I can see his shots, but leading salvos into blind firing salvos into smoke is always tough. It's not, you can always tell the left-right position you want to be aiming at, usually by tracking their guns. It's the depth of the salvo, the elevation of the gun that you're trying to fire that's difficult to gauge based on the smoke. Are your shots too low, too high? It's very, very difficult to tell. At the moment, until just that exact instant, all 3 battleships were still outside my main battery range. But the Mackenzie has actually slid into range, but that's not who I want. I still really want this Emerald. My smoke is expiring in another about 30 seconds or so. His should be about 5 to 10 seconds ahead of mine. He has more or less the same smoke. So I know his is going to be expiring here in just a moment. You can kind of gauge from that shot. He's moved up close to the forward edge to where the longer of that smoke is. And I'm going to try and swing over here and steal what's left of this Farragut smoke while inching a little closer to the cap. Emerald comes out. His smoke either expires or he sails out of it. I don't know which, but I've got the gun. I've at least got the bow guns ready as he turns on the jets. But of course, I get light cruiser dispersion right there, and I'm not going to get much out of it. A little bit of full pin damage. We're going to have a little light cruiser slap fight here, trading some full pin damage as he cruises away from me. That's much better dispersion, but unfortunately, it's all going to land up in the superstructure. Not going to get a ton out of it. These torpedoes shouldn't have the range, so I'm going to go ahead and sail into the smoke. And as you can see there, they didn't quite have enough range. Now, I'm about to be able to take advantage here of a fortuitous turn of events if I've only got about 10 seconds of this American smoke left. The Congo is going to T-bone my target here, the Emerald, and it's going to end up forcing him to go flat broadside to me to get out of there again. Right as the American smoke expires, I'm caught reversing, so now I've got to get my engines turned on before I get thumped by somebody. I'm going to land another good solid hit on the Emerald right there. At least one more sit and some more full pins. As my new smoke is available, so now it's time to go ahead and do that. Some more full pins down the long axis of the Emerald there, down to about 5k with that guy. But that shot's going to get progressively worse, so I'm going to swap to the Congo. My target selection here is based on 2 things. One, the Congo was also getting fired at by some other ships, so that's good. We can kind of focus fire here. He's closer, and he's also a significantly larger threat to me than that Emerald is. Right? Congo has, what, I guess 12, 14-inch guns, whatever it is. They're battleship guns. My hull does not want to get shot by a battleship, so if I can help murder this battleship, that's what I'm going to focus on. And that's what we're doing right here as the team is continuing to put shells into the sky. Now, like we talked about earlier in the video, if I'm able to get shots into his bow, his superstructure, his casemate armor, I will get lots of full pin damage out of that. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to put my starboard torpedoes on the Mackenzie, who is slowly edging into range. By the time I look back, the Congo is basically dead. He's on fire. He's at 400 HP. I'm not going to waste my time. Let's start shooting at this Mackenzie, who is the next present threat, right? The next closest big threat to me. Torpedoes are already on the way. I've spread them around a little bit, not thinking that maybe I'm thinking he'll, continue to move at slow speed or whatever. As it turns out, I've kind of gauged this incorrectly. He is continuing to speed up, and so all of those torpedoes are going to miss astern. With about 20 seconds left on my smoke timer, you can see it there. It just turned orange in the top left of my HUD. It's like, okay, time to get angled and get ready to get out of here. I'm going to reverse a little bit, get my bow pointed, kind of go the other way, put the rudder hard over to port, and let's get moving in the other direction so that as my smoke expires here in a few more seconds, I'm already up to speed. I'm already moving away from this guy. I'm not sitting flat broadside stationary when he bumbles into me at less than 7 kilometers. He's actually trying to turn back to his port, cut back towards the middle of the map. That's good for me. I don't want him to be this close, and I certainly don't want him to be up here. He had HE in the barrel. I took a rudder and cap. I judged that I needed my rudder, so I went ahead and repaired that right away. He takes his next salvo at the Fuso behind me. I don't know if that's necessarily a mistake or not, and then I go ahead and pop heel number 1, having absorbed enough damage to get max value out of that heel. Mackenzie's going to keep retreating. He's going to start showing me a pretty bad angle. I'm at 8 and clicks and change at this point. As he retreats south, it's going to be time for me to secure the guns and avoid getting shot at. As the Renown is continuing to fish for me a little bit, kind of moving into the cap down there. See there? So we're going to let my gun bloom bubble timer there expire. We're going to go dark again as we're going to come back to port and head back towards the cap. We're going to end up sliding into this Fuso for a little bit and actually do a little get down, Mr. President. Take a shell meant for him. Going to burn for a moment until my Damage control comes back up, and of course the smoke in front of me is what's keeping the Renown from knowing exactly where I am and what I'm doing. Now the Renown is about to sail into my base detection no matter what I do, so let's go ahead and try to focus this guy out. The Renown is actually another, again, it's a battleship of any kind. Pretty much any battleship caliber guns are a huge threat to you and Leander. He's the closest, so he's going to draw all the focus fire. We got about 3K in the first salvo, got about 2.5K there. As he goes bow in, I'm going to get progressively less. He's fishing for the Farragut in that smoke. He realizes correctly the Farragut is a much bigger threat to him with those torpedoes. But between me, the Verbus Unitas, the Farragut, everybody's shooting at this poor guy. He's going to go off the board here in just a few moments. Farragut smoke is expiring, but he's going to die just in time as the opposing Emerald, my buddy the Emerald from earlier, shows back up. As we see there, Mod telling me, hey, dummy, it's time for a full heal. All right, excellent. Let's go ahead and take care of that. I could be taking shots at the Farragut right here. The range is kind of crap. I'm going to wait for that guy to get a little closer before I waste time. Plus, the Emerald, you see him there. He's trying to play cheeky, sneak my bow around the island. He's probably going to try and smoke once he does. I'm waiting for this maneuver. I want to try and get some Citadels into this guy. But, of course, no Citadels, just some good full pins. As it is, with me out here firing, the Farragut's actually spotting for him. So I can't sit here and keep firing. I'll just get farmed for free. I'm going to go ahead and pop a smoke of my own here as we slow down to make that a little more attractive. And sure enough, there we go. So now, with good eyes on the New Mexico, he's going to become my next target to kind of try and farm some full pin damage off of. Again, we know the Emerald is in that smoke somewhere, but I can't spot him. And unfortunately, my spotting runs out on the New Mexico too, so this is starting to feel kind of crappy now. Overall, team's doing pretty good. We're up a ship. Game's not quite at the halfway mark. We're down a few points, but we're still in this game. We've got a health advantage, a small ship lead. We don't have the board control, but I think we can eventually get around to it. I'm not overly concerned. It's not panic time yet, let's put it that way. I decided with the Emerald declining to show himself, and I'm going to lose sight of this New Mexico behind the island, it's time to push south and try to help this Arizona and this Texas that have been retreating up the 2-3 line from the disaster that was the sea cap early on in the game. The Arizona's been pretty salty. If you've been reading in chat, he's actually been trying to tell the enemy team, just leave me alone and I won't shoot you. I don't understand quite how he thinks that's going to work out for him, but that's what he's been trying, and, good luck, I guess, because your hull is just XP to these guys, so they don't really care. Managed to put the Emerald down, increase the ship lead a bit, and I realized that the Arizona and the Ranger are going to need help. The Ranger is going to be stuck in that gap because his carrier autopilot is going to ensure his death. Guys, got to remember, whenever you see a carrier driver struggling in an island chain, it's because his autopilot has chosen him for death. The autopilot system in carrier driving basically fails anytime you get close to land. It's garbage. So he's just going to sail around in there and really, really struggle to go anywhere. So I'm going to move back down the 3 line to help kind of cover these guys a bit. The Arizona inexplicably not really moving. He's kind of just sitting still or barely moving at all. I don't really understand that. He's being hunted by a submarine and an aircraft carrier, 2 things that Arizona is not necessarily well defended against, and in doing so, he's chosen to be stationary. So there you go. I'm putting my hydro up because I don't know how close the opposing submarine is going to get to me. Actually, the U-69, you kind of catch a glimpse of him there on the mini-map, already turning south. He's trying to get south around that island in F2 so he can get torpedoes on the Arizona, who is reversing back to the north. The Hawkins is trying to cut north and get him coming behind this New Mexico, and the New Mexico is continuing through the gap, and guess what I have, guys? I have got just the thing for him. Now, I know he's probably going to take the shot at me, and sure enough, his guns are rotating. He probably had been paying attention, he would have known I was there, but he didn't have his guns pre-rotated. And now that I'm clearly here, he has to turn his guns to get a few shells on target. He's going to get some good full pins out of that salvo, but nothing catastrophic. Unfortunately for him, my torpedoes are all going to hit home, and that's going to be a catastrophic hit for him, and he is out. So now I'm left with a dilemma. Do I turn to port and try to cut behind the Ranger in the island and immediately head down and get down, Mr. President, for the opposing Arizona, for the friendly Arizona, or do I cut back to starboard, make the loop, and try to get my guns on this Hawkins, who's going to come through the gap, the exact same gap that the New Mexico just came through, and I opt for the latter. I'm realizing that my guns will be far more effective against this Hawkins, since I don't quite know where the U-69 is just yet, so I'm getting my guns ready to try and catch this Hawkins as he goes broadside in front of me. Now, Hawkins may be a heavy cruiser, but she is still very lightly armored, and at this range, I feel very confident that my guns will do mean things to him if I lead the shells correctly. Or, more accurately, if I don't get screwed by dispersion. Which, of course, is what happened there. He angles away, mostly because he's trying to get guns on the Arizona, which means the second salvo completely falls into the water, but then he runs into the hull of the sinking New Mexico. So now I'm going to get some full pins up in his superstructure. And then he's going to make, finally, a mistake. He's going to turn back to starboard as I finally get good dispersion for a triple sit. If you're in a heavy cruiser at this kind of range, you cannot discount light cruiser guns. They will still, in many ships, many cases, be able to do horrible things to you, as we just saw there, me getting a triple sit on the Hawkins. You're able to do that in a lot of light cruisers with the AP. And so now we have like a 4-ship lead and a cap lead. The Farragut has moved down in cap B. I feel pretty good. We're probably going to win this game. You can see where the plane's coming from the Independence. He's probably lurking down somewhere around the sea cap. There we go. Farragut catches a glimpse of him on the surface, actually in the sea cap. He's bringing planes over here, probably looking for me or the Ranger. And I am not an easy target necessarily. For starters, I can maneuver. I have a heel. And my AA is okay. I'm going to shoot down the occasional Tier 6 plane. As you see there, I get one of these bombers before it comes in. He gets a full pin off the stern. I go, LOL, don't care, as that strike is essentially over. So now the Independence, realizing he's basically got a Farragut in front of him and a cruiser off to his bow, he's going to have to make some very unfortunate and unpleasant positional choices, as the Arizona, who is apparently salty about the fact that he's going to win the game, is choosing to violate the end-user license agreement in chat by trying to explain to the enemy team where we all are. As if they couldn't figure that out, by the way. I mean, they know exactly where I am. They know exactly where the Fuso and the Veribus Unitas are. They know exactly where the Farragut is. So it's not like he's giving them, state secrets over here. But guys, just as a pro tip, remember, you can't go into all chat and tell the opposing team where your teammates are all located, because that is likely to get you a temporary suspension or ban or whatever punishment Wargaming decides to mete out, because, yes, that is not something you can do and get away with. So, I still don't understand this Arizona, man. This dude's been whining all game, and it's like, you whine like a mule. We're going to win. Like, we're going to win the game. You got a kill. You got some damage. I don't understand what's going on here. Like, why are you so salty, bro? But okay, sure thing. Whatever, man. We're going to finish off the Independence here, because that's what you do when you're close range with a carrier and a light cruiser. Life goes on. There's the win. And, bam. Nice little solid game in Leander. About 113, 110,000 damage? There we go. 115, basically. Not too many plane kills. The carrier left me alone most of the game. A couple of kills there. Of course, some big sits. We had a couple on the Emerald and a nice, wonderful triple sit salvo on the Hawkins that basically made the big difference in that engagement. One of the things you're going to see a lot of when you play a British light cruiser is you're going to get a lot of hits. You're going to get a lot of full pins. You're going to get a fair number of bounces. You see there, I've got 217 hits, but look at that. Basically, a full third of them are non-pins, ricochets, or torpedo protection hits. That's very, very common. And these ships are great for farming, like those ribbons where you need to get a lot of shell hits, right? Especially at the high tier, where they put out more shells much quicker. But you're looking for the full pins in the citadels, right? Those are the big damage hits you want, and those, depending on where you position the ship, will usually run about a third or a half of what you actually land on target. About 1,600 base XP, pretty solid for a Tier 6 game that ran about 15 minutes. Farragut here played a great game up north, 1,500 base XP. Fuso in Texas also had good games. Our old buddy, the Arizona, still had 3 kills and was complaining that he was left to die and the team was worthless. And I'm looking at it like, my dude, you won. What are you whining about? So yeah, obviously our big torpedo strike on the New Mexico, about 90,000 damage out of the guns. And then a little bit of plane damage, a little bit of spotting damage. And, of course, we absorbed quite a bit of damage, right? I took 35,000 damage. Did I get a dreadnought? I did not, but I took 35,000 damage on a hull that basically has about this much health, right? So I mean, those heals, when you're able to maximize them and heal back the full penetration damage or the fire damage or whatnot, they are extremely handy. They'll keep you in games, well worth it. I mean, the heals really make the line playable. They really do. Truth be told, in some of these ships, they probably make the line a little on the OP side, which is one reason over the years Wargaming has slowly, steadily brought back their offensive capabilities a little bit with the occasional nerf to the gun reloads that we've seen on like Leander and Fiji over the years. All right, well, there we go, ladies and gentlemen. There's our Learn to Play video for Tier 6 British Light Cruiser HMS Leander. I hope it was helpful. These ships are a lot of fun, and when we get to Fiji, Fiji is so good. But they are, like, these are really good ships, but it's a very, very different playstyle from a lot of other things in World of Warships. And so if you try these ships at 6 and 7, you decide it's not for you, hey, no skin off my nose, right? Every ship is not necessarily for everybody in the game. But I would encourage you, if you haven't tried them, to try them out and see. Because I hope you'll find they're a lot of fun. I certainly think that they are. In the meantime, guys, appreciate you. Wash your hands. Be safe. I'll catch you next time.